All right, it's me, Pat, again, up in the attic. And in this class, we're going to be talking about what goes into actually proving your goat as something worth buying from. And if you're going to be in the business of raising dairy goats, you need to have a good understanding of these different aspects of it. A really good dairy goat breeder is not breeding for color, not breeding for horned or polled, not breeding for eye color. They're breeding for healthy, productive animals that will hold up over time. That's the goal. Other than that, it's just a beauty pageant, okay? For the lack of a better word. So how do you prove your animals out? There are some herds that have shown really, really well over the years. And I won't say that they don't milk out well too, but to me, the sign of a good breeder is when they've defined their own look and they've been able to reproduce it. That doesn't mean you buy lines, because buying lines doesn't really help you. If you buy Rosasharn, if you're paying premium price, then you're buying the top of the line, and Anne can't keep everything. But if you're buying Rosasharn and you're buying a median price, paying a median price for it, you're not getting her best show stock. That doesn't mean that you're not getting you're not getting a wonderful doe. That doesn't mean you're not getting a productive doe or a friendly doe. It just means that your doe may not be as competitive in the show ring. Or it may wind up being that way because we make those judgments when they're babies. And we make those judgments based upon what we've seen in past kids from those lines. It takes a while to know what you can project. So when you're buying from a herd that's been in business for 1 or 2 years, or they've been collecting stock from all over the country, they haven't had the time to really learn how those animals are going to be put together. Because some genetics don't blend well. I have a doe here who's a wonderful milker. She is half Rosasharn and half Joby. She herself and her mother are record holders in length of lactation. But when we cross Fern with certain lines at my herd, her babies aren't healthy. We've gotten better about figuring which lines work well, and we're going to be retiring her. And her daughter that we did cross successfully and get her to survive is really hardy. But sometimes you have a disadvantageous cross. And it takes time to learn that. And it doesn't mean throw the animal out. It just means find a different set of genetics to work with. Now, the practice of buying up lines without actually looking at the genetics behind those lines has caused us some problems as a breed. A lot of people buy up Rosasharn, which I love. I have a lot of Rosasharn in my herd. But when you buy up Rosasharn and you're buying up another herd that's also Rosasharn, you may not be getting the genetic diversity you think you're getting. You hear the terms inbreeding, outcrossing, line breeding, and what does that mean? Outcrossing means breeding animals who are not related to each other. Inbreeding is breeding parent to offspring or aunt to nephew, even grandfather to granddaughter. That's inbreeding. Line breeding is having a common ancestor. And you'll see this animal might be line bred on Goodwood Alamo Messenger. Well, that's really nice. But I can tell you that Alamo Messenger is about a 15-year-old buck line. So Alamo Messenger has not been around for a long time. If somebody is saying that they're line bred on Alamo Messenger, then they have outcrossed a lot. There's a lot of mix up in there. And maybe those messenger genes will find each other and amplify each other, or they may be a complete miss. So when you're looking at your line breeding choices, if you're looking at adding genetics to your herd, look at the ancestry going back 3, 4, 5 generations. Don't just go back 1 or 2. Also, if you go back 1 or 2, there's a herd, Shenango Hills has done this a lot. Shenango Hills, when David Funk started his farm, he wanted the best he could get. So he bought several does and I think a couple bucks from Rosa Sharn Farm. He also bought several does from Dosey Doe Farm. Well, Dosey Doe Farm may have had a different set of herd name, but they had the same genetics. So when you cross Dosey Doe with Rosa Sharn, you're basically working with Rosa Sharn genetics. You're not getting the genetic diversity that the names might imply. So what that did was really concentrate some wonderful genetics, but not diversify as much as I would like to see diversified. That's just my preference. I do a lot of outcrossing on a line. So I've got my Hames and Axel animals, which I can project what I expect out of them. They're going to have beautiful heads. They're going to have wonderful necks. They're going to have wonderful length of body. They're going to have great angulation and their way their limbs all fit together. But they're probably also going to toe out. They probably are going to be a little loose in the elbow. But if I'll cross those with another line that's tight in the elbow and has straight toes, then I can then start to change what I have from that I like and correct those things that I don't like. And because I have an outcross on a predictable animal, I have a better chance of getting predictability in the offspring. Not 100%, doesn't always work, but what I do wind up with is another generation to work with, which has more genetics to play with, so that I ultimately wind up, I believe, with a really good, strong, healthy animal. Okay? So when you're looking at your pedigrees, don't get caught up in the master champions. Don't get caught up in the star Ds, although that means a lot. You want to really look at the diversity of the bloodline and go back a ways to make sure that you're not piling on all one set of genetics. Also make sure that you're actually get some predictability, because if you've got a herd that's 4 or 5 years old and it's been bringing new stock in every year for 4 or 5 years, they have no predictability yet. They may have tremendous amount of diversity, but they don't yet have predictability. And at that point, every breeding is a crapshoot. Now, how do you read a pedigree? I've talked a little bit about this in the alphabet section of a different class, but PGH is a permanent grand champion in the National Dairy Goat Association. A CH is a permanent champion in the American Dairy Goat Association, and an MCH is a master champion, and that's a permanent champion out of the American Goat Society. You may see ARMCH, which I used to refer to as armchair. That's an advanced registry master champion. That's an animal who has proven themselves through their offspring or themselves as being a good, solid milking animal that's also won a championship in the ring. At the end of a name, you may see a star S or a star B. Those are offspring males of a milking mother who's earned her registry star. You may see a star D or a star M. Excuse me, it's a star B or you may see a star B or a star S, and those are offspring males of a proven milking doe. You may see a star M or a star D. Those are proven milking does. They have reached their star on their registry. Star M and Star B are the American Dairy Goat Association notations for milking. Star S and Star D are the American Goat Society designations for milking stock. If you see a 2-star M or a 2-star D, that's a second generation milking animal. That's a doe whose mother reached her registry star. And that continues on. So if you've got an 8-star D, that's 8th generations of solid milking animals. Now, what does a star D mean or a star M mean? There are 305-day tests. Those are tests where the animals are milked every day, and a supervisor comes out and they measure that milk once a month. And those animals receive an advanced registry star. And then there are 1-day tests. Those are mathematical predictions based upon a doe at a certain date in her lactation and the milk production she does on that date. So given that date, they have a set of calculations that they can work up and figure out what her projected butterfat would be, what her projected protein or fluid milk would be, and that is then given a star of, on that day, she milked well. That is a little bit more manipulable than a 305-day test. A 305-day test is every day for 305 days. Or if you can't keep the dough going for 305 days, I believe it's 270, but I'm not exactly sure, that you actually have this is a complete lactation. If your dough dries up after 90 days, it's not a complete lactation. Her milk won't count towards, it will count towards her lifetime milk supply, but it will not count as a finished lactation. So you have to really keep track of those records of dates of birth, when you start to dry off, when was the last time that she was milked. And if you start to dry her off a month before you actually dry her off, her official date of dry off will be the day you dry her off. You will need to tell that to whoever your supervisor is. So if you see a star D and no advanced registry at the top at the beginning, that's a doe who maybe got her master championship, but did a 1-day test, as opposed to a doe who did her master championship in AGS and also received her advanced registry star. You will also see bucks with an AR MCH, and that means obviously they didn't milk, but 3 of their daughters did. Or 2 of their daughters and 1 of their sons produced 3 daughters who did. It's our way of saying this is a sire who has a proven dairy buck. Because we can't milk a buck, we can only look at his daughters and his granddaughters. So you may also see a plus sign in both AGS and ADGA. A plus S means that 3 daughters or 2 daughters and a buck have reached registry levels and gotten their stars. Or you may see plus plus, that means 6 offspring or grand offspring have reached it or more. So you may see, for instance, I have a buck named Little John. He's Hames and Axel's Little John. Star S, but he's also Hames and Axel's Little John plus star S, because he is the daughter of a milking doe. His mother was Rosa Sharon Hames Scotch 4-star D AR. And he was the father of 3 milking does. So he earned his plus and his star S was inherited. Then you may come across some numbers at the end of a name. Those numbers may be 91 or 86. Those are classification scores from the American Goat Society. Or you may see letters like E, 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 or V, or VG, and then some numbers after that. Those are scores from an American Dairy Goat linear appraisal. And linear appraisals are done annually, and after several years, the score becomes a permanent part of their name. So if you really want to know exactly what kind of lines you're working with, you want to see on that pedigree several sets of generations of milkers and well-placed. I know this don't require championships, but well-respected animals. And the reason I say I don't care about championships completely is because it very much depends upon the judges, and it depends upon where you live. Living here in New England, I compete with not only the Rosasharn herd, the Fairleigh herd, and in the old days, the Old Mountain herd, as well as the Dragonfly herd. They're four of the top herds in the country, and they all are within 50 miles of my house. So I don't have the money, and I limp, so I don't get to show them off as well as I should. But I routinely place near the top in my lines. That's not to boast. That's simply to say that I have one champion out of my line right now. And that's Master Champion Hames and Axel's Gauguin. Gauguin was a full brother to Little John. Gauguin just stayed under height. Little John went over. All right? So when I'm looking at where my animals stack up, within my region, my animals are very well respected. Outside of my region, people may not know me. Once they get my animals to their farms, though, they're usually very happy with what they see. Because in other parts of the country, an animal that would place at the top of the ring at their shows would not place well at all out here. New England animals don't necessarily place well in California. So if you want to win in your area, if you care about that, you need to look at what's winning in your area and make sure that you're working with that genetics. If you care about milking, that's a lot easier to find. And I would say don't be afraid to ship something in. Having the genetic diversity will be helpful anyway, let alone making your animals a little bit more marketable because you have that unusual genetics. So, what do you have to deal with in the show ring? When you are showing, you need to clip your goats. You can't show a goat well with fur. All right? And you can go on YouTube and find out more about clipping. It's October. It's the end of September here. I'm not about to clip my animals and have them freeze all winter long. But you need to have your animals clipped for the ring. That doesn't mean bald. I use a surgical blade on the udder. I use a 10 blade on the legs and face, and I use anywhere from a 5 to a 7 blade on the body. Bathe your goats first, dry them off, and then clip them. And I would recommend, especially if you have a black or a white doe, clip her a week or so beforehand to let her coat grow back in. Otherwise, all the razor lines, which are hard to get out anyway, will definitely show up, and she'll look kind of mangy. You'll need to trim the hooves up. You need to clean the ears out. You need to check out under the tail to make sure that she's clean all the way around. That's part of fitting and showmanship. You should work with your animal to get her to walk alongside you. And a really important thing of biosecurity is when you're in the show ring, don't run your goats up on the goat in front of you. Give a couple feet between you and any other goat near you, not only to avoid any violence that might happen between the goats, but to avoid any disease that one goat might be carrying that your goat is not able to fight. That type of courtesy in the show ring is not emphasized enough, and I would really encourage you to do that. When you are showing your goat, try to have your goat posed on an uphill part. Some of that you're not in charge of and in control of. Your judge is going to have you go a certain direction. You have to go the direction the judge says. But you might have to go so far as to make a little ditch for the back legs to sit in. It's not cheating. but it is helping to make sure that your animal is showing off as best as it can. The judge is going to know the difference. The judge will look and see as that goat moves. But they also expect you to do what you can do to make your goat look as good as you can make it. If you have to stretch those back legs out in order to get that perpendicular back rear end angulation, the judge is going to notice that. He may or may not care, but they'll notice. The udder should be balanced between the back legs, not squished between the back legs, nor should she look like she's doing the splits. Just set the back legs out a little bit. And the front legs, ideally her front legs should be directly underneath her shoulders. Not stretched out in front, not out behind to try and show off a false brisket. And the best way to do that is to actually pick your doe up right between the front legs from the brisket. Pick her up, let her feet just hang, and then settle her back down. Her legs should be straight. And if they're conformationally straight, she should not be out at the elbows too. If you put her feet too far forward or you stretch her back end out too far back, she's going to look weak in the chine, which you don't want. That's a really important thing to have strength about. So you need to learn, and again, there are some great books out there from Harvey Considine. There's some videos. Talk to some people around you to learn how to show the goats off to their best. I'm not all about showing, but you do need to learn to play that game. All right? So that same approach to showing goes into your linear appraisal. If you're going to have your goats LA'd or AGS classified, you need to bathe them and clip them, and you need to be prepared to put them in show stance and hold it. And if you do get a chance to have a linear appraisal, really ask questions and listen to the appraiser. Those men and women know more about goats than you could ever imagine, and they'll be able to tell you all sorts of information, including maybe telling you how that goat's going to age. So really listen to those opportunities. Linear appraisal is a very good way that is more objective than showing to get a rating of how your goats are stacking up. One thing about showing, your goats are only as good as the way you show them and as good as the judge who's judging them. And I have been showing under some judges who don't understand a dairy goat from a pygmy goat. And there are other judges that I have a lot of respect for, that they really do understand a dairy goat. But the reason you have to win your championships under more than one judge is because you need to have at least 2 different people who think that that's a beautiful animal. You can't show under the same judge 3 times and have it all count. Only 2 of those would count. So if you go to a show and the judge says your animal is really bad, don't believe him completely. Listen to what he says. Listen to the reasons that they say. Take a look at your animal and assess, how did you show it off? What can you do better? Maybe she needs to lose a little weight. Maybe she needs to gain a little weight. Maybe she was too stale. And maybe the next generation is what you need to be working on. But don't give up, because that's one judge's opinion on that day. And everybody has a bad day, even a goat. That's why linear appraisal is a very useful tool, because it's much more objective of looking at how this rates against a scale rather than against the goats in the ring. You can have a doe who does really, really well in a show ring because all the other goats behind her are terrible. So you really look at those things that are much more objective. Dairy test, linear appraisal, AGS classification. Even having a mentor come in and help you assess which are your best animals, which ones maybe you should let go of. Okay? Those are all part of the business of dairy goat farming. Beyond that, some of it's luck. But there is a seasonality that you have to consider, and also how competitive you want to be. If you travel a long way, your goats will dry up because of stress. Your goats are more subjected to stress. They're more subjected to disease. So you have to weigh where your priorities are. But that's part of what people don't understand when they get into, I want to breed dairy goats. I want to breed Nigerian dwarf goats. You do have to travel a bit. You do have to show. And in a little while, we're going to talk about what it takes to be on milk test and what it takes to get the best scores you can get. Okay? So this is just an introduction to showing and the beginning of marketing of your goats. And we'll have more of that in later classes. So I'll talk to you later. Bye.